What up, Tolkien Poppers? It is Nick here with an exciting episode of the podcast where I get to talk to Dr. Giuseppe Pezzini, who is the author of Tolkien and the Mystery of Literary Creation, which was published by Cambridge University Press earlier this year, 2025, and it is a literary exploration of Tolkien's own literary approach to writing fantasy and art in general. And Beppe was just very gracious with his time, and we had an awesome, super nerdy conversation where we talk about the book and Tolkien, and I think that you will hear it, that it's just two Tolkien nerds getting together and just talk about Tolkien. It is a really fun episode. But if you are unfamiliar with Beppe's work, I'll link his bio and his other stuff in the show notes. But Beppe Pezzini is associate professor in Latin at Corpus Christi College, Oxford, which he joined in 2021 after 5 years of teaching in St. Andrews and research fellowships at Magdalen College Oxford. And the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. So besides in the United States, the dude has a lot of connections to Tolkien's own journey, which is very cool. He holds a BA and MA in Classics from the Scuola Normale Superiore in Pisa and a doctorate of philosophy from the University of Oxford. And he's a member of the RSE Young Academy Scotland and the Young Academy of Europe, and an associate member of the ITIA Institute at the University of St. Andrews. And he has just done a ton of stuff in the realm of classics and in the realm of Tolkien studies. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. I know I did. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation with Beppe Pezzini here. Welcome, everybody. This is Nick from Tolkien Pop, and I have a fantastic treat for you all today because I am joined by Dr. Giuseppe Pezzini, who is the author of the newer book, Tolkien and the Mystery of Literary Creation, which we will be talking about. So I'll just, I won't delay the excitement for our listeners, Beppe. But how are you doing today?
But fantastic. I'm very much looking forward to chatting with you tonight, Nick. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We talked. We were kind of just chit chatting a little bit about our audio and just getting everything set. And I think that I just got off of work, and I'm sure we have busy days, but I appreciate you doing this. Before just diving into our questions, Beppe, could you tell the audience who you are a little bit, if they're not familiar with your work, what you do, and particularly related to Tolkien as well?
Fantastic. So I'm a professor of Latin at the University of Oxford, especially Corpus Christi College. I come from Italy originally, as you can guess, but I've been in the UK, in the United Kingdom for almost 20 years now. So my heart is really like buried in this country, which I love very much, and to which I came originally to follow Tolkien's footsteps, because since I was a young kid, from the age of 8, step by step I developed a great love for Tolkien, to the point that I decided when I was around 17 years old to try to become a philologist. But since I was in Italy and there was no way to become an English philologist, I decided to become an Italian philologist, which basically means to study Latin philology at university. I went to university in Pisa, but already in the second year, I had the opportunity to go abroad. And I chose Oxford because, indeed, I knew that there was a connection with Tolkien. So I came here originally in 2006 and essentially stayed. I met the professor, was indeed a Latin philologist who would become my mentor, and then I did all my studies in Oxford, the PhD and then postdoctoral fellowship, and then after a period of visit in the US, in Princeton, and then in Scotland, I came back to Oxford at last in 2021. So it's been 4 years and a half that I've been here in Oxford. And in Oxford, as I said, I teach Latin language and literature, but I also founded or helped founded a research center on Tolkien in the university. And just tonight, I'm just back from the book launch of the new Bovadium Fragments book, and we were there all together, all the scholars of the Tolkien Oxford network, as we call it, celebrating the publication of this new book. Just tonight, with Simon Orobin, Mark Arthur Thorne, Stuart Lee, also Michael Wall was there, and Richard Ovenden, and all the staff from Harper and Collins. So it's a double treat tonight for me, like a book launch in the late afternoon, and then a nice chat with you in the evening.
Man, awesome. Heavy hitters tonight. That is so cool. I think that, like you said, I think a lot of people will resonate with your experience of, like, once you find Tolkien, you can't escape him changing the trajectory of your life. And so for you making, the pilgrimage to Oxford, and then, landing the dream gig of living in Oxford and working at Oxford is just, I feel like every Tolkien person there is just going to hear that and be like, how do I follow in Beppe's footsteps and get there? So that I love that. I appreciate you sharing about your work, and, just a little bit about your, double Tolkien, double dipping in Tolkien today. But, you kind of hinted about, you grew up, it sounds like you hinted at reading Tolkien, enjoying Tolkien to the point when you were 17 to making that decision to head to Oxford and study abroad and be a philologist and all that. And then, of course, writing a monograph on Tolkien. But before jumping into, like, your book and everything, would you mind kind of going into a little bit deeper detail about how you got introduced to Tolkien and his works, and then how your Tolkien experience has brought you where you are today?
Yes, I would say it's interesting because, in a sense, I think my experience is similar to those of many other people, that it's a multi-layered experience of Tolkien, I would say. So I started, my first reception of Tolkien was oral, in the sense that some guy from Italy, when I was very little, told the story of the Lord of the Rings. So my first approach was by someone telling me the story, which I already loved. Then I started to read the Lord of the Rings in an Italian translation, because that's, of course, I was in Italy at that time. And I think the first time I read it, I was very young, I was 9, 10. I'm pretty sure that kind of I did not understand much, or I read it very quickly. I mean, at the age of 10, you can really read carefully the Lord of the Rings. I remember skipping the poems, so that's something which is in my memory. I skip all the poems. And then I continued to read it. And when I was in secondary school, in high school, it was already a bit different, because I was a bit more in the nerd phase, I would say. So the secondary school was the nerd phase, when I was kind of memorizing all the different names of the kings of Rohan, and I was trying to learn Elvish. Then when I went to university and they came to England, it completely changed that, because I was a bit grown up. I wasn't ashamed of my Tolkien interest, but I approached it with a different kind of angle. So I started to read The Lord of the Rings to improve my English, because I read it again and again and again, and there was, for me, you will say, another falling in love with Tolkien, because one thing is to love Tolkien for the stories, which is great, but another is to love Tolkien for the language and for the style and for the description. And there was really like, really, I remember an experience of falling in love reading the Lord of the Rings in the original English language, with a focus on the language, not just on the story. But that was not the end, because at that time I was not a scholar yet. So there was like, I was doing my Latin philology work, but my Tolkien interest they stayed there. I used to read at least once per year The Lord of the Rings or the Silmarillion, but until I went to the University of St Andrews in Scotland, where I was there for my first job. And a friend of mine, we had a nice chat one evening about, I think there was language and Tolkien, and so we had a good discussion, and he said to me, well, why don't you come and give a seminar on Tolkien at the University of St Andrews? And I never thought about it. I mean, I never thought of kind of trying to connect my work with my Tolkien interest. I mean, they were in a way connected, because I chose to become a philologist because of Tolkien, but by then they were like two separate strands, a bit like the Secret Vice. In a way, I was reliving, in a sense, the experience of Tolkien. So I went to give my first talk. I remember I was invited by George, who is the guy to whom I dedicated the book, and it was very well received, and said, why don't you give another one the following year, and again and again. And so it's only since 2017 that suddenly and unexpectedly, like an adventure for Bilbo Baggins or for Frodo, I started to give a lot of papers on Tolkien, and they started to grow like different leaves, in fact, and converge into a tree. And this tree then became the book. But then I started to write about something else. And then in 2020, just when there was COVID, I applied for a job in Oxford. I still have a great memory of Oxford. I can share. When I was in Oxford, I lost my first son here, who was born with a stillbirth, and now he's buried next to Tolkien. So I still had a kind of very close connection because of that, because there was only one cemetery here in Oxford, which is the Wolverhampton Cemetery, and I almost had forgotten that Tolkien was there. But so again, I really saw like a bit of a trace. When I came back, then there was 2021, and then the following year, the 2023, there will be the 50th anniversary. So I said, let's try to do something together to celebrate Tolkien. So with other friends and colleagues, we put together this Center for Tolkien Study, then developed again, because then I can share this also. Last year was conducted by Philippa Boynes and the other authors of the Peter Jackson movies, and now they invited me to be their consultant. So I've been working for them for the next 6-7 months on the new movie, The Half from Gollum. So it keeps going in a way. And you were asking before, how do you follow my footsteps of everyone? I really don't know, because I'm really not planning too much. I mean, I really following my own path, and I think that's in a way a Tolkienian experience, which is great, because I haven't planned anything in a way. I did not want to become a Tolkien scholar, and I never, just 10 years ago, if you had told me that I would be speaking tonight about a book on Tolkien, I would say you're completely mad in a way. So I think that's the way it is. I mean, it's really like a path, following a path, and then they keep going, essentially, see what happens.
Yeah, the will of Iluvatar. It seems like you're aligning yourself with the will of Iluvatar there. That's fantastic. I appreciate you sharing your story. And then, thanks for sharing that very vulnerable moment about your son. I'm sorry to hear about that. And I think, like you said, it feels very Tolkienian that he was buried next to Tolkien, right? There's a eucatastrophic reality there that sounds very, very meaningful. So thank you for sharing that. To the point too. I mean, it's the Tolkien connections is real. I feel connected to your story, because, like you said, once you start with Tolkien, you make connections, you write papers, you meet other people, and it just kind of keeps going. And I mean, that's very cool that you're a consultant for the Hunt for Gollum. That is just so exciting. I guess before Jimmy, when did they reach out to you for the Hunt for Gollum?
I mean, no, it was again a chance by chance, because they were in London in November, and we had this Tolkien seminar, so we knew that they were coming. So actually, a student of ours, wanted to invite them to give a seminar, which is still available online on our website of the Tolkien Network, with Philippa Boynes. And then we had, I invited her for dinner. I mean, I knew who she was, but didn't really know much. I mean, I liked the movies very much, but in a sense, and then we had this nice dinner together, two of us, and I wouldn't say we fell in love, it's a bit too much, but I really loved her approach. I really saw in her a great love for Tolkien, which was real, which was sincere, which was creative. Again, of course, in a different language and so, but I really really liked it. We had this sort of beautiful Tom Bombadil-like conversation the evening, in a sense, and I think she also liked me too, because we connected on the love of Tolkien, something that maybe we touch on later. With Tolkien, there's not really hierarchy in a way, so it's like bringing everything together in a way. It's really a point of dialogue and encounter with any kind of people, with any kind of background, even any kind of profile. I mean, she's a great, in a way, a star to a certain extent, but just a writer and a philologist. But we really connected, I think, the evening, and so after a few months later, then also we started a relationship, and I've been working with them since February, March yet. I signed an NDA, so I won't be able to talk about the movie, but because I need to be very careful and so. But I can share it's been a beautiful experience so far, and I appreciate the love. I mean, again, everyone is different, and they come from different perspective, of course, because they're making a movie and not writing a book. But the love, especially of Philippa and the other screenwriter, is real. Okay, it's true, and it's something which I really like.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I won't get you in trouble and press further questions, but that I appreciate you sharing. That is so cool. It's the it was like a little fellowship esque gathering, if you will. Yeah, the bringing the different people with different interests and different walks of life. I love that. It's beautiful. But yeah, so that's very cool. I did not know that. So cool. All right, so because you talked about kind of this journey that you go on takes you to meet, artists and other scholars and stuff, and eventually maybe even leads you to write the book. And the specific book is Tolkien and the Mystery of Literary Creation. And so one of the things that I picked up on that I interpreted as one of the goals of the books as I was reading it was to unpack and systematize Tolkien's literary theory, which is most explicitly articulated by him in his lecture on fairy stories. So for those who are not firmly familiar with On Fairy Stories, could you briefly summarize the crux of the lecture and why it is so important to understanding Tolkien and the rest of his work?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the title, in fact, of my book is called The Mystery of Literary Creation, which is a quotation from a letter by Tolkien, and that's the expression that he uses to gloss the word subcreation. It says subcreation or the mystery of literary creation. So I could have called the book Tolkien the subcreation, okay, but there would have been, I think, I think mystery literary creation is more precise, okay. Subcreation is a great term, but the mystery literary creation, I think it's a bit more complete. Of Fairy Stories is certainly a key text, not as an objection, but maybe as a kind of, I think that it's not the only text and not the most explicit text. I think there are two texts written about the same time, and the other is by Nigel. And in fact, it's not a coincidence that Tolkien published them together in, I think, 1966 in Tree and Leaf. Okay, so I think Tree and Leaf, there's two texts of Fairy Stories, and Leaf by Nigel were written up in the same years, 1938, 1939, both of them were descriptions of the experience that he was having as a writer. So again, we need to remember that, and that's something which I say again and again in the book. I mean, like, Tolkien was not a theoretician, he's not a theoretical thinker. I mean, Tolkien was a practitioner. So when in 38, 39, a big chunk of the Lord of the Rings has already been written, and then at a certain point he feels the need to basically describe his experience. And I think that On Fairy Stories and Live by Nigel are not like, external texts and nothing to do with the Lord of the Rings. The opposite. They are a description in different codes of the same experience of writing the Lord of the Rings. And that's something that Tolkien himself, of course, alludes to. So I just want to say On Fairy Stories should be read together with, I think, Live by Nigel to complete the picture, if you want. It's difficult to sum up On Fairy Stories. It's complex text. I will say only one thing, which I think brings everything together, which connects to what we were saying before already, which is the main claim of Tolkien on Fairy Stories is that literature, and especially the fantastic literature, which is, or better, the literature that he does, I think is redescribing his own literature with On Fairy Stories, first of all, is real. This is very important. It's something which is as its own reality, which has a lot of implications. So I think the crux is, for me, literature, the world of literature is real. Meaning what? Meaning that it's not somehow a mere allegory of the primary world. I mean, it's a secondary world at its own intrinsic reality. It's a world where you go into. I mean, it's a perilous realm, Tolkien will say. It's a tree, something outside primary reality. So it requires, in a way, stepping out from primary reality to go to a secondary world. So essentially, I think like the main core is that this secondary world is real, is a real world where we are called to enter to. And this has a lot of implications, okay? So I cannot discuss all of them, but this real world is a world, for instance, that will give escape. And another very important image that Tolkien uses on fairy stories, we escape into the secondary world, not in the sense that we kind of, that's difficult to, it's the line, the subtle line, it's not the sense that we want to hide from the primary world, but we need to be freed, not from the primary world as such, but from our understanding of the primary world, which is always reductive. So, a lot of other implications, but if you want to, I think the main thing is this. the secondary world exists as a given reality, is a given reality. And so it's a creation, so put in a different way, it's a real creation, it's a creation. The writer creates something new, not something which is already found in the primary world, not just a mirror of the primary world, as many of the ancient authors that they study believed. I mean, literature is just a mirror. Okay, yeah, there is the real world, and then we are kind of mirroring the. Where for Tolkien, a secondary world is an addition to the primary world. It creates something new. It's Tolkien will say in a letter that he kind of a secondary world art is even able to exfoliate reality. So that's a key word that Tolkien uses. It's like another branch of the tree. If you why sub-creation? It's not creation, it's sub-creation. Of course, there is the idea of the Christian idea, meaning that at the end of the day we are under one God, but even for people who are non-Christian, they can understand the sub-creation essentially means that the reality of the secondary world is given. It's not something that comes from the artist as such. For the people who have read Leaf by Nigel, which I think is really like a mirror of fairy stories, the reality of the tree is given by the voices. It's not something that Leaf Nigel himself is able to create. And that's something very important, very beautiful, because when Tolkien was writing these two texts, The Lord of the Rings was not completed yet. So he had no idea what would have become of it. So it was almost kind of a wishful, or better, a hope, almost a prophetic desire what was going to happen. That is to say, The Lord of the Rings will become real. And as you were saying before, that's I think the reason why Tolkien can become life-changing, because it's something which is real. It's something that we understand. It's beyond ourselves. It's beyond even the mind of Tolkien himself. It's something that exists. The secondary world exists. Not of course in the primary sense, but it has its own reality, and we are called to enter into it. And in that sense, I think, again, we're going for another 20 minutes, okay? But I think in my view, I think the main crux, the main claim on fairy stories, Live by Nigel, is this. What are some key implications, which somehow relate to a lot of other problems with Tolkien? If the secondary world has its own reality, it should be understood, first of all, in its own terms. We cannot use it to talk about primary things. We cannot really use the secondary world to talk about politics or philosophy or religion or whatever, okay? First of all, we need to enter into the secondary world and love the secondary world for what it is and for its own rules, for its own sake. If we don't do that, any kind of reading a scholarship of Tolkien is un-Tolkienian, okay? Because the main claim of fairy story is that the secondary world is real, we need to treat it with respect and love.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's clear enough. Please, if it's not clear, please let me know. But I think that would be my take on your question, which is a difficult one.
Yeah, it's tough. It is tough, especially with how sporadic Tolkien's stuff is. I think that one of the things that Tolkien is very detailed, but he is not a focused man, And so I think that one of the things that's helpful with bringing, kind of unpacking on fairy stories, and then what you did is bringing in, really highlighting how important Leaf by Nigel is, especially not only as you analyze them together, but even Tolkien and how when he wrote them and how he published them in Tree and Leaf. But I think that you touch on this more in your book, and I won't spoil all of it so people can go and buy the book. But there's two aspects that I see where Tolkien's, the way that he approaches fantasy or art in general is one through experience, right? It's an experiential thing. You had talked about if fantasy or the secondary world becomes a means to an end, right? It's un-Tolkienian. No longer is it fantasy, it becomes a tool for your own ends, right? And then I think the other one is just the expression or the artistic, I don't know the right word. Yeah, the experience and then the artistic expression of that experience. And so you've got the experience sort of trying to be articulated on fairy stories, and then it coming out into the expression in Leaf by Nigel. And it's just and like you said, those two things coming together and highlighting that Tolkien wasn't a theoretician, but an artist and a practitioner of those things, I think was really helpful and important. So thank you for that. So I guess going to your point about the primary and the secondary world, and I think in your book, I think for me, when you talked about how or explained how Tolkien understood our ability to enter the real secondary world, I think was extremely, extremely helpful in more ways than I think a lot of people who've written on Tolkien have tried to explain it. But you just like you said in your last answer, is that in the book you make a distinction between Tolkien's real world, aka the primary world, and particularly his theology, and then his Middle Earth, or his aka his secondary world theology. And throughout the rest of the book, you demonstrate how this is the case, right, that they're separate, while arguing also that to understand Tolkien's literary approach to art is to also recognize that these two theologies are necessarily interrelated and in conversation with one another. So why is this understanding and recognition advantageous in interpreting Tolkien and then engaging his work in general?
Yes, I mean, this is a very difficult question. And again, I ask difficult questions, Nick, okay, but I'll try to address them. But I think what it is exactly, I would say, let's start thinking about what is exactly theology. What do we exactly mean by that? Okay, so, I mean, there are different ways to understand the word. But if the theology is a system, there is something about faith. I mean, like, there is faith. I mean, Tolkien was a Christian. We know that, and he always said it. I mean, he was a Christian. So, he was not a theologian, absolutely. I don't think he was a theologian at all. I think he would have objected to the definition if we had said Tolkien is a theologian. No, not really. He was not a theologian. He was a man of faith. He was a Christian man, of course, very intelligent, very clever, and so on. So when we talk about theology, are we referring to, I don't know, his own speculations about, the doctrine of original sin, or... I'm not referring to that, essentially. So for me, I'm interested in the theology in the sense, in the etymological sense of the word. Okay, theology means the study of the theos, of the divinity, but also all in a secondary sense. So for me, the main interest for me is secondary. So is there a theology in Arda, in Middle Earth? Yes, of course there is, because that's the way everyone who has read the Silmarillion knows that the beginning of the Silmarillion is essentially a catalogue of gods. And again, theology, should really theology, so there are many gods in a way in the world of Middle Earth. And we know that in the early drafts, Tolkien used the word gods. There is a theology in Virgil, a theology in Shakespeare, but internal, I mean, there are gods, many, many gods, and one god in Tolkien. Okay, so for me, the main interest is that I'm interested in Tolkien's secondary theology in a way. So I'm interested in the Eru, Tolkien is the godhead who creates Arda, and also the elves and men. I'm interested in the Valar. I'm interested in the Maya. So I'm interested in Gandalf, who is a Maya. I'm interested in Saruman. I'm interested in Tom Bombadil, who clearly is also Maya. But it's not that I'm interested in these things because the other things are less interesting. Okay, so everything is interesting in Tolkien. Okay, so I'm interested in the theology, as I'm interested in the ecology, as I'm interested in the geology, as I'm interested in the language, in the philology of everything. So the love for this secondary world is complete. I mean, for me, I kind of think about someone who loves Tolkien is not interested in the ecological, the way Tolkien articulates the relation between nature and creatures, or the way between different people, and so I'm interested in everything basically. Okay, so for me, it's very difficult to select. I like this and I don't like the other one. So at the end of the day, I'm interested in theology as part of the secondary world. And I'm also interested, even more than in theology, I'm interested in with a literary theory, but I mean, to go outside of the jargon, I'm interested in the way art is conceived within the Lord of the Rings. I mean, there are a lot of artistic objects in the Lord of the Rings. There are the Silmarils, of course, but the ring itself, in a way, it's a work of art in a certain sense. There is storytelling, so there is a lot of reflection in Tolkien about the function and the nature of literature and art in general. Connecting all the dots, basically, the question that I'm most interested in is the relationship between the two. Essentially, how the theology and the literature in the secondary world interact. I think about the Silmarillion is a very wonderful example. Okay, the Silmarils are elf-made, so they are artifacts, but the beauty does not come from Fëanor, but it comes from the light of the tree. So, and there is in the early drafts there is a very complex description of the way Fëanor creates these gems, which is very beautiful, using the different pearls and different liquids and gems and so on. It's very complicated and so on. So this is very, very interesting. So, and Tolkien himself said that clearly there is a lot of interest in this sort of problems. Okay, what's the nature of art? Why the Silmarils are beautiful? What's the function of the Silmarils? What the Silmarils are about? And so another question that comes straight after this is like, what's the relation between different levels of reality? Because we know that the light of the Silmaril come from Valinor, but the gems come from the earth, the matter. So another key question is, how do these different planes correlate? Again, we're still in the secondary world, okay? We're still in the secondary world. And another question is, therefore, what's the relation between Eru and art, but also Eru and the characters in general? How does Tolkien articulate these relationships? These are all like in the secondary sense. And what we discover by delving deep, delving very deep, is that for Tolkien, essentially, the kind of there is an analogy, or there is a sort of chain of relationship within the secondary world between different planes of reality, so which are different forms of art, in a way we can say, between the Silmarils and the light and so on, which kind of pushes the boundaries of the secondary world. And we go to what we said before about subcreation. In Tolkien's secondary world, we see a literary verification of what he says on fairy stories. That is to say that any lit creation, in order to be real and true, needs to have some life from outside. I'll give you another example, but there are plenty. Aule, the Vala Aule in the Silmarillion, wants to create the dwarves. Just like the ancient character Pygmalion, for instance, he decided to create the dwarves. He creates the dwarves, but they are not alive. They are just puppets. And then Eru comes and says, do you want them to be alive? I can only make them alive. So again, the dwarves themselves, we have the same kind of combination of this drama, okay, which is, yes, the dwarves are secondary because they've been made by Aule, but at the same time they have within themselves something which is primary, that is to say, something that comes from Eru. And we can relate again with the whole history of Arda. Arda is a creation of the Valar. The Valar have created Arda. So the Arda itself, it's a work of art in a way. But within Arda, we have characters that don't come from the Valar, but come from Eru, the elves and men. So you see, that's not something that I'm adding, because Tolkien himself says that his main concern in the Silmarillion is the relationship between primary and secondary world, between creating reality and subcreation. That's something that for him was very, very important. And that's the mystery of literary creation. What is literary creation? Literary creation is a mystery. So you always have this sort of intertwining and blending of different planes. So again, starting from the theologist, but and if I go in deep into the depth of Middle Earth and Arda, what we discover is that we discover some sort of presence of something from outside Arda, if you want. And that, in a way, will lead to a certain extent to the primary world, naturally, okay? But you see, starting from the secondary world. So the secondary world is a world which is real, which must be loved for its own sake, and it's a starting point of any kind of research. But it is impossible, this is sort of infinite, it's impossible just to stay still in Arda, in the Middle Earth. We are move forward. The move we move forward, the move we discover that is bigger and bigger and bigger. A friend of mine from France, and then I conclude now because I could go on for on and on, makes this very beautiful image which I like very much. I really quoted this. Michael Devois made a very good point. He says, reading Tolkien is like entering into a swimming pool, but a swimming pool which has a fourth wall open to the sea. So you start swimming in the swimming pool and everything is clear. It's a wall which has its own clear boundaries. It makes a lot of sense. But the more you go, the more you understand that actually you're entering into the sea. When you enter into the sea, not clear. Is it possible to divide the pool from the sea? Not really. The thing that the water is the same, but yet mixed together. But the starting point is the pool. You jump into the pool, and you need to love the pool. But the more you love the pool, the more you go forward. Another Tolkien image, the leaf. We start from the leaf, but if we really love the leaf, we want to see what the leaf is. The leaf is in a branch, and the branch is in a tree, and the tree is in a forest, and the forest is in a world where mountains in the background, as Tolkien will say, live by an eagle. So, going back to your question, theology is one aspect of Arda, so the way the Valar and the Ilúvatar interact, but just as everything in Arda, going deep into these questions will lead you out into the sea. And that's why I bring in a way the primary, I wouldn't say theology, but more kind of the primary thoughts of Tolkien on the nature of art and so on. But again, as something which is organic with the secondary world, and yet distinct by it. It's a bit of the paradox, but it's a mystery. Otherwise, it would not be a subcreation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about just going back to On Fairy Stories when he talks about when creation stops being a prisoner and becomes a partner, right? Or once you let creation and all of these elements that make up the world, the leaf, the tree, free, it's able to grow organically and we're able to interact. And the Silmarils are a great example, and I think a lot of listeners will be able to follow that because of the light, which is sort of reflective or parallel to the secret fire, right? And so it's kind of captured in this sense in the Silmarils. It's put into these gems. It's a collaboration between the primary light, and then of course the light from the trees, and then of course from the gems and the earth. And when things start to go wrong is when, instead of a collaboration, Feanor locks up the Silmarils, right? Which is very interesting to think about it in light of On Fairy Stories. As soon as he locks it up, that's when people start coveting, they start making weapons, Morgoth comes and kills Feanor's father, etc. The problems go on from there. Like I said, the pool, I really like that image as well, because like you said, the pool is there, you take care of the pool, you make it clean, but ultimately, if you say that the pool is the ocean, you're missing the whole point, right? You can't control the ocean. But also, if you just stay in the pool and don't go explore the ocean, you're missing out on a bigger world, which is just fantastic.
And you're missing out also on the nature of the pool, because the water in the pool comes also from the ocean. So it's not just you're missing out something outside the pool, but you're also missing out inside the pool, because the pool itself is already filled with the water from the ocean in a sense. So the two things are got together. So there is a distinction, but really the image works very well, because the pool and the ocean is not the same thing. It's very clear they're different, yet the water is not the same, yet the same. It's the same and not the same, like a river going into the ocean. When do you like the Thames here in England, where the River Thames goes to the North Sea? I mean, there is a big chunk in which the water is neither salty nor fresh. I mean, it's a mixed water in it, if you want, and it's impossible when you're there. Are we in the Thames or are we in the ocean? Unclear. But we need to start from Oxford for the very beginning of the river, if you want, and beyond. To get into the ocean, okay? So that's what basically Tolkien says.
Yeah. Oh, it's moving away from that. I feel like, the non-dual, approach to that. Like you said, the distinction's there, but it's very murky. Yeah, I love that. I appreciate that clarification. So I guess with, since we're on this point about like distinctions, but also connections, for you talk about, Tolkien's secondary theology in a literary sense, which is the primary concern of the book. But you also you kind of emphasize and talk about how Tolkien's theological anthropology is necessary to his own literary approach. But I think this is typical, and I think a lot of people have a hard time with this, but theological and literary analysis are distinct methods. And so, like I said, you primarily perform literary analysis on Tolkien's secondary work theology, as you just talked about for us. And then you bring in some theological analysis when you bring legendary theology and primary world theology together. So why did you emphasize the difference between the two methodologies? And then what insights did your analysis uncover while you were doing that?
Yes, thank you for the question. So my main concern, again, which I think it was the same concern of Tolkien, is that it relates to what we were saying before about the fact that we need to love the reality of the secondary world for its own sake. So the problem that I have with many people doing theology on Tolkien is that they are using Tolkien to basically talk about something else. They can talk about Christian doctrine, they can talk about ideas about things and so on, but it's always like using Tolkien for another purpose. That's, first of all, is very divisive, because then we cannot, in that way, there is a clear separation between people who are Christian and people who are not Christian, or maybe there is even not just a division, but also an appropriation, using Tolkien as it were a flag for a cultural project, especially maybe of the right, but sometimes also on the left, okay, because, again, Tolkien has been appropriated also by the left. I mean, you can use appropriate Tolkien to do, I don't know, ecological discourse. And I mean, of course, I do agree that Tolkien was an ecologist, but the approach is a bit similar, isn't it? I mean, it's like, okay, we use Tolkien to talk about something else. Whereas I think a literary approach is the one that I prefer, because it's an approach which doesn't want to talk about something else. That wants to talk about Tolkien. It wants to understand better Tolkien. It wants to understand better the secondary world and better the literature. But to do that properly, again, as you were saying before, if you want to understand, let's use, instead of the theology, we can use ecology, because it's the same, basically. Because I mean, I wrote a book with a more of a theological dimension, because I was talking about subcreation, where by definition the idea of God comes in. But I could have written another book on ecology with archaeological understanding, and I would have done it in the same way. So I would have asked for myself, what is the ecology of the secondary world? What is the ecology? How does... And then I will study, of course, the relationship between tree bird and their wands. So a lot of things you could do, and the way Saruman is destroying the trees and so on in the secondary world. And then by going there, I would start to say, well, where does this come from? And of course, we could relate to what was going on in Oxford at the time. The Bovarian fragments that were just published today, or launched today here in Oxford, were about an attempt to build up a motorway in the center of Oxford, okay? So kind of 4 lanes, motorways in the center of Oxford. And then we can see how Tolkien's primary words on ecology in the letters, in a sense, resonate with what also he expresses in his literature. So paradoxically, that's what in a way, I'm doing in the book. To illuminate better the secondary world, I'm referring to the primary world. So even when I talk about primary thoughts I'm normally using them to make more sense of the secondary world. So it's the opposite. It's really the opposite approach, because there is one approach which is to use Tolkien to talk about primary things, or, which is the approach that I try to follow, is to use primary things to understand better the secondary world. Still, in my concern, is the secondary world. That is to say, what Tolkien expressed in his literary world. And sometimes what he says in the primary world is useful, and especially is what I find especially useful is Tolkien on exegesis of the secondary world. Because Tolkien was not just a writer of his own works, but he was also a reader and a critic. We have lucky enough to have a lot of letters published and unpublished where Tolkien talks about his literature, and very often I'm reading it in a way, I'm discovering new things on the theology. Going back to the theology, for instance, he says in one letter, I think I don't remember if published or unpublished, he says, I did not understand there was a lot of theology in the secondary, in the Lord of the Rings, until someone in Australia published an article, and they read it, they say, oh yes, they're right, I mean, look at all that. And he discovered through another piece of literature how much of theology, if you want, was buried in the Lord of the Rings. But again, I talk about theology, but use ecology, that would be exactly the same. Okay, so what I'm interested in is like, what is the nature, what is the death of the secondary world? Okay, and in this particular book, what I'm interested in is the question of literature. What is literature? What is art? And this remains for me, first of all, a secondary question, which yet by its own definition opens up to the primary world, because that's what Tolkien not just believed, but expressed. I go back to what I was saying at the beginning about unfairy stories and Live by an Eagle. These are things that he wrote while he was writing The Lord of the Rings. So these were like self-reflections on his writing practice. So they're not like a manifesto, okay, or what literature should be like, but it's more what is my literature is like, okay, how do I understand my literature? In that sense, they are really like commentaries to the secondary world, but for me the core remains the secondary world, because that's where you can meet other people. That's the beauty of Tolkien. I really dislike any form of appropriation of any kind, red, blue, black and white, left, right, religious, non religious, pagan, any kind. Let's stay in the secondary world. And let's respect the secondary world. And we more respect the secondary world, the more we also will talk about ecology. And I will go even as far as say any possible approach to the secondary world for me is acceptable as long as it starts from a love of the secondary world. So for me, I don't see any difference between some form of gender critical theory on Tolkien and some form of theological critique on Tolkien. The same. It's an external agenda, okay? Or just two different camps. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in understanding the secondary world, and if Tolkien's primary views are useful to understand better the secondary world, great. But let's not change the priorities.
I think the parallel that you made between the theological approach that you did in the secondary world it would be the same approach that you would do to his ecology in the secondary world. And, I think making clear here, which I'm kind of grasping and chewing on as we're talking, and when I was hearing you talk, is that you started off with the literary aspect, right, in the world to shed light on Tolkien, rather than saying, okay, how do I interpret Tolkien? And now I can interpret the Middle Earth or the Legendarium the correct, the quote unquote correct way. And I think that way is extremely helpful, especially if you want to come as close as you can get to an objective understanding of Tolkien, right? As you talked about, there is no, like, the beauty of literature, and especially using Tolkien, like, the conversation keeps going, the world keeps growing, right? And as Tolkien, you argue in the book that when Tolkien gives commentary on his work, that's not just him having an experience, but that's an essential part of creating good art, is that you can go back and make a commentary and you're like, I don't know, let me reflect on that. Let me discover my own work, and then collaborating with other readers on making discoveries, as you pointed out with the writer making, pointing out theological things that Tolkien then recognizes, oh yeah, I guess that's there. And then if I ever get anything wrong while I'm reflecting here, or if you want clarifications, feel free to interrupt me.
No, I agree with exactly what you said. I think that's really the point. Because you see, if something is real, something that is real, if you think about it, can never be fully understood. So going back to what I said at the beginning, the secondary world is real, literature is real, art is real, so it never ends. It's not a logical formula. It's not a philosophical treatise that I study, okay, I know what it is about. It's not it's something which is never ending to a certain extent. So every time we read The Lord of the Rings, all of us will discover something new. And indeed, Tolkien himself said in a beautiful letter, I really like any interpretation of The Lord of the Rings for me is fine, even if I don't agree with that, okay? But I mean, as long as it's not allegorical, he said in the letter, that is to say, as long as it does not try to extract or to use confirm something that was already in the mind before, because that's really the problem. The problem that I have with a lot of approaches that, in a way, they are discovering what they already knew before. So they do research and they know already what is the truth. And so let's try to find ingredients for Tolkien to confirm what I already knew because I studied some theological or philosophical ecological treatise. That's really non-Tolkienian, because in Tolkienian writing is a discovery. So not just writing, but reading is a discovery. By reading, and that was happened to me when I wrote this book. I didn't know really where I was going. I mean, I didn't have a plan. I mean, in a sense, I did relive again Tolkien's own experience of writing, which is I started with one question, I started with another question, and then I started to see the connections there. But until the very end, I did not really know where I was going in a way. And it's a report of a journey, okay? It's not like a philosophical treatise. It's like, I'm not saying what I already knew. I really discover things, and I'm very happy to be corrected because maybe new readers will understand something more than that and so on. But again, as long as you stay at the secondary level, because that's the word, quote Live by Nico, where we can all go to be refreshed. And we need to be refreshed in Tolkien's secondary world. And especially in a world, we say that, which is divided, which is filled with war, which is filled with polarization, especially your society, but also in my society, where people don't talk to each other. We really need to protect spaces where we can go together, even if we come from completely different backgrounds and so on. And to do that, I mean, we cannot really say, okay, I'm not talking about ecology because it's a lefty thing. I'm not going to talk theology because it's a right-wing thing. I'm not talking about gender stuff because you cannot really do that, okay? Because it's kind of, you're blocking the encounter with other people, you're blocking the dialogue. Let's stay in the secondary world and let's just ask questions and let's respect the text and the literature, okay? Because if I say, I don't know, that Tom Bombadil was Eru, as some people have claimed, I mean, it's not that I'm saying something which is ethically or morally or theologically wrong, okay? It's something which is not true within the secondary world, because we know from this and that Eru did not enter Arda, that Tom Bombadil was clearly a Maios and so on, or we can discuss that, but that's the kind of level of interpretation that we need to stay. The truth and the reality of the secondary world, not external truth. And this sort of problem is something that Tolkien himself faced. We know there's a beautiful letter which there was a Catholic a reader who said to Tolkien, why did you say that the orcs were not creative? What was exactly? I mean, you say something about the orc. I mean, and when you say something like, that the Sauron created the orcs. Okay, so how can you say something like that? I mean, it's impossible that. And Tolkien got very, very upset to say, but why are you using external criteria to judge the secondary? You judge the secondary from within the secondary world, and then you also say, of course, then Treebird, and then the answer in the way is that Treebird did not anything, and he made mistakes. So maybe that's what Treebird said, that is not perfect, and so on. So maybe we need to be improved. They kept thinking about exactly what's the origin of the orc, okay. And in fact, there are different interpretations of it. But what Tolkien objected was using external truth or perceived truths to judge the secondary world. And that's an act of disrespect to the freedom of the writer. It's really an act of almost of a violence to the freedom of a writer and also to the internal reality of the secondary world. But at the same time, it would be a very bad mistake if I stay in the secondary world, but I'm not talking about certain things because they don't sound nice to me in the primary sense. I mean, that's like blocking the knowledge. It's like, again, impeding the dialogue. I mean, because it's impossible for me not to be interested in the ecology of the secondary world, and also it's in theology, in its relationship between different characters, and in its conception of friendship. That would be like ideological. I think we cannot have an ideological approach when we read literature.
No, that's great. And I love the clarification and kind of helping and clarifying Tolkien's spot, but then also, not shutting anyone down. But if there are those who think that Tom Bombadil is still Eru, for listeners out there, go read the Athrobeth. You got to read the Athrobeth, right? And obviously a little bit more than that. And before moving on to our next question, this will be a little tease, because one of the things that I found most convincing from your book was when you started from the literary and then moved on to reflecting on your death of the author and the resurrection of the author, and how you connected that to the experience of characters was with Gandalf. And just with that. So for those of you there, if Gandalf is like he's my favorite character. I know a lot of listeners love Gandalf. So for those of you who are like, should I get Beppe's book? If you want to just analyze Gandalf and see how Gandalf reflects how Tolkien approaches literature, it's worth that alone, in my opinion. So,
thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so in your earlier work, in Tolkien studies, you lay out the phrase a poetics of cloaking or a cloaked poetics to describe the way in which Tolkien instills this meaning in his writings, right? Getting away from the ideological and kind of looking at the implicit meaning that comes out. So, and in the book, you further develop this understanding of Tolkien's cloaked poetics. And I think this phrase was like a light bulb went in my head. I was like, oh, this is like amazing. So what are cloaked poetics and how did Tolkien implement this concept?
Yes, I mean, again, I will, since you mentioned Gandalf, I will focus on Gandalf because I think for me Gandalf is a very good embodiment of cloaked poetics because Gandalf, we know who Gandalf is. I mean, everyone, but even without reading the Silmarillion and the letters, I mean, there are enough hints in the Lord of the Rings and the appendices to know who he is, okay? And we know he is Maya, and that is to say a sort of angel-like figure, okay, who was there at the beginning of the world and entered into Arda together with the gods, the Valar and so on. Not only we know that Gandalf has been sent to Middle-earth by the Valars themselves under direction of Eru, okay, so he's in a way a messenger of Eru, sort of secret agent of the Valar Middle-earth. I mean, that's what... Again, anyone who's on the Silmarillion will know, okay? But, I mean, clearly the hobbits, don't know about that at the beginning, okay? I think that at the end they will know. They will know. Some of them will know, but Gandalf never reveals who he is. Not only never reveals that, but its very nature, the very way in which Gandalf comes into Middle-earth is on purpose made to be cloaked. He's really, that he says very often, okay, he's hiding his power, he's cloaking his power, so it doesn't really, why he's doing that, that's something they discuss in the book, but for me it's really the point. I mean, why Gandalf is doing that, why Gandalf does not come with his in full strength and leads an army to destroy Sauron, I mean, or at least try to do that, as he could have done, because we have cases previously in the history of Arda, of the Valar and the Maya coming in full strength to fight Morgoth and then destroy. I mean, there are some precedents in a way. Why the Valar don't do that, okay? And we know that why they don't do it, because they are decided, okay, for some reason, that it's much more effective or better, it's much more corresponding to their task of stewards, the guardians of the world, to do it in a way we can say the way of the gardener, essentially. Okay, it's a way which needs to respect the other creatures in a way, and so Gandalf's decision to cloak himself is, I think, very connected. I think Tolkien says it very connected to amend the errors of all. Tolkien says, and is very connected to the very first revelation of the Valar in Middle-earth, which is when they summon the elves to come to Valinor. If you remember, for the people who read the Silmarillion, the Valar come to Middle-earth, Aurora encounters the elves, they're worried about them, they love them because they are other from them and so on, so they summon them to go to Valinor, and that's very problematic. Ulmo, Valar doesn't want that, and he says it's going to be very bad, and in fact it's going to be very bad, because the Noldor and all the other elves go to Valinor, but then things go bad, they will go back. So paradoxically, a lot of the problems that we have in the history of the Arda comes from Valar's decision to go to get the elves into Valinor, if you want. I'm talking now secondary now, okay, but I'm trying to go general now, but basically what is Tolkien trying to express, okay, what Tolkien is trying to express is this idea that higher power, even divine power, because the Valar are divine power, if they really want to be really powerful in the true sense and not violent, if they really want to kind of be good powers, they need to kind of foster the growth of the other people. They need to respect, first of all, the freedom of the other people. They need to respect the freedom of the creatures and interact with them in a way which doesn't force them. There are plenty of passages in the Lord of the Rings where this is referred to. My favorite is where Gandalf says to Frodo, I could try to get the ring from you. Okay, so if you remember, I mean, in the dialogue in the second chapter, okay, so in this first chapter, Gandalf needs to get the ring, okay, because if Bilbo goes away with the ring, it's over, game over, essentially, okay. Bilbo will be corrupted. Bilbo will most likely be found by Sauron. The first chapter is a moment in which really everything could go wrong. Gandalf could break Bilbo's mind, and we make reference to it at a certain point. He could try to do the good thing and get the ring out of violence from Bilbo, and save the world. He doesn't. He bets on his freedom completely. He doesn't say to him, do what you want. He says to him, leave the ring. But so in a way, the provoking freedom is not just kind of washing the hands away. Okay, so there is a relational dimension. But he lets him go. What does it to do with your question, Nick? Everything, because basically that's what art is about for Tolkien. So if by analogy we say that art is the way deep truths about the world, the reality are expressed in a deep sense, and especially for Tolkien, who is expressing in his own literature something very, very deep about the nature of the world, the way to express these words needs to respect the reader's freedom. They cannot be imposed on the reader's freedom. Because that's the problem with allegory, as Tolkien will say in the letter. Why I don't like allegory? Because allegory is a sort of manipulation of the freedom of the reader. If I read a book and start saying, look, page number 1, guys, Gandalf is a Maya, is an angel sent by Eru to tell the hobbits what to do against Sauron, and eventually teach them that there is a god and they will need to lead Middle-earth to go to them, okay, because that's basically what happens in the Lord of the Rings. I mean, we will not be here tonight, okay? Not only us, but the hobbits will not have even left. There is something about the respecting of the freedom of the hobbits. Again, by analogy, this applies to art. Summing up what I've been trying to say now in secondary forms, the cloaking poetics, the poetics of cloaking of Tolkien, I think, is basically this idea that art needs to respect, the power of art needs to respect the freedom of the reader. We need to respect the freedom of the reader, and therefore we cannot say everything. We need to leave the readers, and again, we could apply this not just to deep truths about nature and life and whatever, even just in general, okay? So the author needs to respect their readers. The author should not try to manipulate the readers. The author should not try to impose an interpretation of his text into his readers. The author should let his text go. And this is very problematic, okay? I won't make you any names now because I don't want to, but there are authors nowadays that are very upset about this. They really cannot let go, and they always are there ready to say, you did not understand this, you did not understand that, the correct interpretation is this. Tolkien will never do that. Tolkien prefers instead to hide, if you want, even the deepest truths about his own secondary world, to allow the readers to take their own time. Going back to the analogy I was making before, it is as if the master of the ocean, okay, the god of the ocean, will drag with violence the people swimming in the pool. No, just like Ulmo in the Silmarillion, the calling of the sea, the calling of the ocean, okay, is something which is very subtle and discreet. We are invited to leave the pool and go into the ocean, okay, but we're not forced to do that, okay. We can stay in the pool if we want. We can stay in the pool for our own life. We can read Tolkien a superficial level for their whole life. And that's so in a way fine to a certain extent, okay? But we are invited to go to the ocean, and I do think that I do hope that everyone will try to swim into the ocean, okay? But this invitation cannot be done in a sort of very, very violent way, as it will be if everything will be very, very open in your face, essentially.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you answered the question. Again, it's a complex question, but I hope that I think in the book I'm clearer than this, but I think it goes a starting point to a possible answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, the book, like you said, that the Gandalf, especially connecting to Gandalf and the cloak poetics to that, was like probably my favorite part of the entire book. Honestly, it was that thread that kind of gets drawn through, and it has a great payoff at the end of the book. But I think the point for the question is just like Tolkien wants to tell a story, and he wants people to enjoy the story, right? If you want to make it super simple, and you're talking about pushing people, being forceful about their interpretation or letting people do what they want. And I lost my train of thought there. But ultimately, it's just part of what keeps bringing people back to Middle Earth, right? Is that experience and the freedom we get to run around in Middle Earth and discover new things over and over again, which is great. So thank you for that answer. For our last question, Beppe, you kind of already brought this up a little. Mostly, you kind of articulated. I specifically kind of have brought up theology as a controversial term in Tolkien studies and fandom. But as you talked about, there's different ideologies and approaches that are also controversial. It's kind of hard to get away from that. But, and it's not even unique to the realm of Tolkien. But the tension that some of these terms generate feel pretty apparent, especially right now. And then especially in the rise of theological criticism in Tolkien studies. So I really do think that your approach brings a remedy to this tension by acknowledging its theoretical realities. One of the things I appreciated is that you didn't say, here is this literary theory, this is the best thing we have, end of story, this is the best way to understand Tolkien, right? So, why did you frame your book as a conversation generator rather than a conversation ender?
Yes, again, another hopefully very Tolkienian thing to say and to do in a sense. Okay, I think like the problem of the conversation, ending the conversation. Okay, is really the problem of the ring. Is the problem of control. For me, it's very striking. If I can speak very openly with you, is like a lot of people appropriate Tolkien. Okay, do exactly what basically the ring is about. So I say, I've read Tolkien, okay, because one of the key ideas of Tolkien, maybe not the only one, but one of the central ideas, of course, of the rings, is to give up the power of the ring, renounce to the power of the ring. And what does the power of the ring do? A lot of different things, but essentially one main thing, which is the power of the ring gives control on other people. It gives you the control on otherness, on the others, okay, because you can make him visible so that people don't see you, and so you're kind of independent from them. It stretches your life, so you're not bound to the laws of nature. So it makes you somehow autonomous, being in control of other people. The ring, especially, I think the biggest power is the one power of Sauron, to control the minds of other people in a way. So the problem of control, okay, which relates to what we were saying before about the process of clocking, which is another way to describe the process of clocking, is like giving up control. The giving up control is, I think, the key problem, okay? So trying to end the conversation, trying to say, I've written the book and no one else will ever say anything else. That's it. Of course, this is completely stupid because we have a lot of stuff which is still unpublished, so maybe will be new stuff that will come out, but also a lot of work has not been done yet on the history of Middle Earth and so. But even if I have kind of read everything and I got all my this is my own take. This is my own little contribution to this. And the story will continue. This for me, the whole point is, I would say, not only I will say I don't hope to close the conversation, but also the opposite. Okay, so for me, it would be like a complete defeat if we close the conversation. Okay, because it relates to what I was saying about the endlessness of the secondary world and literature in general. Okay, so we are like links in a long chain of readers, starting from Tolkien himself, Christopher, and so on. All readers of Tolkien, starting from Tolkien himself, had the same temptation at a certain point to say, I own him. Okay, I own Tolkien. It's a problem of ownership, which is another facet of the problem of control. I own Tolkien, it's mine, which I can understand because to do with the problem of love. Think about Fëanor and the Silmarils. He loves them so much that he doesn't want to let them go. And I think I understand the drama in a way. So when you love something so much, for me, it's a very common experience that I have when I talk to Tolkien scholars in a way. All of them, most of them, and me included, they have this temptation to say, I only understand Tolkien. What I've done is, they understand it, okay, because since you've dedicated so much of your time, of your love, or maybe because Tolkien helped you in very difficult moments of your life, Tolkien is a good friend of you. But the point of Tolkien, by analogy also with someone else, it is yours, but it's not only yours. It is something, and therefore to open the conversation is the very nature what Tolkien is about, essentially. The very nature, again, is about allowing ourselves to enter in a relationship with other people, allowing the hobbits to open up the Shire to the rest of the world, allowing the rest of the world to acknowledge the presence of the Shire, and creating this sort of putting back people in a relational experience. What the power of the ring does, okay, if you think about Gollum, create an autonomous being, okay, someone who is autonomous, doesn't want to engage with other people. Again, what has this all to do with interpretation of literary text? Everything, okay, because if I only read my own stuff, I mean, another very common experience, I'm an editor of a Tolkien journal, which is called Journal of Inkling Studies. And again, we receive articles that reinvent the wheel, okay? So we receive an article that they claim to have discovered some great truth about Tolkien that possibly another 200 people have been said better in the past 20 years, okay? That's a very common experience, okay? Very, very, very common. Because people don't engage in interaction with other scholars, okay? But that's also what scholarship is about. That's what... So... the only two way for me to read Tolkien in general, but also to enter the secondary world, is to understand the fact that it's a world open to other people in a way. And so I'm called to give my own personal unique contribution, okay? Maybe I have a vocation, as you have a vocation to do that in a way, but to be completely real, I need to put this my own interpretation in relationship with other interpretations, to be ready to be corrected, to grow, to improve. And this, I think, also addresses the problem of polarization, okay? Because I feel like the problem of polarization and the ownership and the problematic readings of Tolkien, okay, for me, what they have in common, wherever they come from, is that they say that's their interpretation. That's the others don't understand anything. They are like evil people who don't understand anything, so we don't engage with them. We have our own conferences with only our people for one side or the other, and so on. I think really we need to grow up on that. Okay, I do think that we as Tolkien scholars or Tolkien readers and Tolkien fans, we need to grow up. For the love of Tolkien, we need to stop really turning the secondary world into a primary world, because the primary world is already messy. And in the primary world, we do have the polarization in the primary world, and it's maybe unavoidable. But at least in the secondary world, let's try to be open-minded, respect each other, interact with other people, and so on, and engage also with the point of view of other people. If we don't do it in the secondary world, I mean, we will never be able to do it in the primary world. And one of the things that Tolkien says, Fair Story, as we know, is really that the secondary gives the possibility to be refreshed, okay, to rediscover things that we are forgetting in the primary world. It's a way to escape the primary world, but also to come back to the primary world with open eyes. And I think it would be like wasting this great opportunity and wasting this great gift that Tolkien's literature has been, because there are not many other authors that are loved by so many different people in the world. I mean, I don't think that you can name many other authors. I mean, you do have all your own preferences, but Tolkien is loved by everyone, okay? Then let's not waste this, and let's really engage in this ongoing conversation, just like the Valarin and the Ainur engage with this musical event at the beginning of the Silmarillion. I think that's really what we need to sing together with other people, okay? Even if it's difficult, even if it's problematic, and hopefully, again, you were talking about the tension. My attempt in my book is really to bring back even the discussion on theology in secondary terms, because if we bring it back to secondary terms, then we can talk with everyone else. We can, just as we talk about any other topics. The problem that I have, as I think you have, with other kind of problematic interpretation, or as I emphasize it, at the end of the day, I feel the stink of power of the ring. I see the power of the ring. I feel the power of the ring as an attempt to control and manipulation. Okay, for me, this is problematic wherever it comes from. Okay, honestly, really, wherever it comes from.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. It sounds like we need to be more like Gandalf, right? There's always going to be Sarumans in the world, and even when the Sarumans do their thing, right? What does Gandalf do? He opens his arms and he's like, "Come down from the tower. Let's do this thing," right? And whatever Saruman decides to do, at that point it's up to Eru, right? At that point it's up to Eru. Yeah. Oh man, this has been so much fun. I think when you find Tolkien people that you can go on this level with, it's easy to just go back and forth and spend a long time. But, to respect your time, Beppe, before we sign off here, I want to say thanks for taking the time to do this. Thanks for writing the book. It's just, like I said, it's just, this has been way too much fun. But is there anything you want to say, any last words that you have? And then if so, please share them. And then, if not, that's cool. And then afterwards, please tell people where they can find you, where they can find your work and all that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe one thing I will say is like that. This book, I finished this book in 2023. Okay, so then actually it was finalized in December 2023, and they were sent to the press in 2024. But then there was a big problem, not just with my book, but with the whole press, because there was a hacker attack. So the whole thing there was a long delays of. And in that year, okay, so the book was already out of my hands, but things kept to be published, essentially. Okay, so I kept reading stuff, very good articles and books written by other people. Okay, and I felt like, oh my goodness, I should get this, stop the production process, and I should start changing this and that and so on. And there was a moment in which I was very tempted to do it. In the end, I didn't do it, okay? I didn't do it, I mean, not just because there was no time, because I couldn't negotiate it for time, but it was more like at a certain point, I had to kind of completely let it go, okay? Completely go as something which is beyond my control. It's also full of mistakes and problems, okay? So, I mean, when I reread this book now, I see, just like Tolkien, I would say, I see a lot of problems. I things that I don't like, things I will put in a different way, things that I could have expressed better if I had read this and that. I mean, but I think that this is also good. Okay, I find like I'm at peace with that, and I think that's another good approach that we need to have, which is which has to do again with the nature of separation, which is we are not in full control of everything. We have done our task for the time that we were given the task, and then that's it. Okay, this book now does not belong to me any longer. It's out there, and as again quoting Tolkien, of course, it is a bit like a child, so I do still care about its destiny somehow. I mean, but at the end, it does not belong to me any longer, which means that I offer it to the Tolkien world, okay, but without ownership to a certain extent, okay, and I think this sort of attitude should be there from every point of view. I mean, we do our own bit, we offer it to something which ultimately does not belong to us, and which we are only one part of. Okay, so I don't want to, again, of course, that I wouldn't be able to, but I don't want to control other people's minds. I don't want to kind of now become, okay, now I am written the book that will control all the books. Okay, first, because it's not true. I was just last Friday with Michael Drought, who has written the fantastic book, which is coming out in the next few weeks, called The Tower and the Ruin, and I really it's going to be another fantastic book. And a more fantastic book will come out, and I'm pretty sure in 20 years my book will be forgotten or completely superseded, and that's all right, that's fine, completely. I mean, this is it's part of the story we're in. Okay, so as quoting Frodo, I mean, we are part of a story that will never end. It's the great tales never end. Okay, and we do our part, but knowing that our part is a part. Just like, again, quoting Bilbo at the end of the Hobbit. Okay, yeah, I think I had my own quest and adventure writing this book. I was moved, I cried, I suffered, I had trauma and so on, but now, and I think maybe I gave a contribution, but now the world is bigger in a sense, and the world of Tolkien scholarship is much, much bigger than this book.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for that. I appreciate you contributing to the story big time, and I mean that. Thanks again, Beppe, for doing this. Where can people find your work? If you have any online spaces, where can people find you?
Yeah, I try to be far away from social media, because I know that if I have a social media, that will be the end of my life in terms of time. But I will refer to, we have a nice network now at the University of Oxford of people talking on Tolkien, which is called the Oxford Tolkien Network. If you Google it, it will come up straight away, and my page is there with my email address, and I think that's the best way for me to contact people who have any questions or comments or whatever. I'm also in Oxford, if people people pop to Oxford, please be in touch. I always like to chat to Tolkien people. There are Tolkien people around always in Oxford. Of course, that's a good place to be. But in general, again, I want also to refer to their website because, again, even here in Oxford, not the only one. There are quite a few people now who work on Tolkien, which again, it's not just in Oxford. Of course, there are a lot of other good places, important places in the world where academics work on Tolkien. We are again one of the communities, but even here we are a community, and the fact that we have the Tolkien archive and the history, of course, makes things easier or at least more exciting. But so next time you're in Oxford, just drop me an email, and if we have time, I'm very happy to meet up.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, the book, everybody, is Tolkien and the Mystery of Literary Creation. I will have a link to the book. I'll have a link to the Oxford Center for Tolkien. And then also the website there if anyone is interested. So thanks again, Beppe. This was really fun.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much.